All right, guys. Well, welcome to the kit room. This is where we look at the technical side of lure fishing. And today we're going to be looking at how to choose the correct soft plastic for the given situation. So I get this question asked an awful lot. I turn up at a water, we all do it the very first time. We look at the conditions, we look at the water clarity, we look at how sunny it is, what the temperature is, what the fishing might have been like in the last few days or weeks running up to it. Has it been good? Has it been hard? How do we pick that first lure to go on, and then how do we swap out throughout the day to try and make the very best day possible? So first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about tail type. So for me, it really comes down to four main types of tail, going from the bottom end, which is the most subtlety, all the way up to the top, which is the most amount of aggression. So in terms of subtlety, I would really be looking at the first type of a pintail or a V-tail. Something like this on the gunky wriggle. This is called the V wriggle. And this is an incredibly good lure when the fishing's hard, the water's cold, or it's very pressured. They've seen it all before. They don't want a lure in their face that's got a lot of action. They want to be able to approach the lure in a very slow manner and be able to kind of sniff it and suck it in. They don't want it moving fast. So when I'm fishing pintails, I tend to fish incredibly slow, incredibly negatively. I'll dead stick on the bottom for long periods of time, hopping it along the bottom and then just leaving it there. Sometimes you can leave it, particularly if you're zander fishing, for 10, 15, even 20 seconds at a time. Just wait, like go and make a cup of tea, come back, and sometimes there's just one hanging on the end. Those are the days when it's really hard. If you're in a competition, that tends to be the second half of the match. The first half of the match, the fish tend to be a bit more aggressive. You'll catch a few early on, and then it gets harder and harder throughout the day. So for me, pintails and V-tails are when it's very hard, very cold, or you need to present very slowly. Moving up from that, a little bit more aggression. When it's still hard, but you want to fish a moving lure, I would go with a curly tail. The curly tail, as you can see here, I'll try and hold it up for you. As I'm pulling that, you'll get those real subtle vibrations coming off that curly tail. And because it's so thin, it's not really displacing any water. It's not an aggressive type lure. It doesn't alter the way the body fishes. It'll just be a little bit of movement and a little bit of visuals in the tail. So that's moving up a little bit more in terms of aggression. Next one up from that, I would pick what I would call like a regular paddle tail. So for me, it would be something like, you can see the thin tail there onto a fairly thin paddle tail on the Tipsy XL. On the Whiz, exactly the same. So we would have a thin tail and we would get a bit of movement out of the tail, but again, it's not super aggressive, but we get quite a bit of movement, a little bit of water displacement. And then moving right up to the most aggressive type, which is really your kind of pike fishing, is why it's my number one pike fishing lure, is the gunky G-bump. Obviously, massive tail, really thick wrist. And what this does is, unlike the Whiz, for example, the body would stay stable and the tail would just move backwards and forwards, kind of giving you like in terms of cadence, it would give you like a brrr type rhythm. This is giving you a womp, womp, womp rhythm. It's throwing a hell of a lot of water. The tail's moving, the tail's so big it starts to make the body roll and it twists backwards and forwards, and this is a really aggressive lure and absolutely fantastic for pike. Okay, so the next factor we're going to move on to in terms of lure selection is talking about the colour. So as a general rule of thumb, the clearer the water, the more natural and clear your lure should be, and the more coloured the water, the more bright and solid the lure should be. Now, the reason being is, now there's one caveat to that, but I'll come on to that in a second because that's zander. So in general, for perch and pike and chub, when the water's very clear, it means two things. One, the fish tend to be quite finicky, and two, they get a long time to be able to inspect the lure. They've got a lot of amazing senses, and eyesight being one of the best. And I think if you're offering something that isn't falling into the category of them naturally thinking that could be some sort of bait fish, a little bit of silver, a little bit of gold, what I would call a suggestion of a lure rather than a solid lure right in their face, then you know, so for clear water, I would select something like this, maybe a little bit of white, very translucent, a little bit of silver in it. Something a little bit skinnier, something a little bit more subtle with the tail, moving up to like super colored water where I would select, you know, savage greens, looks super unnatural, oranges, any of your kind of bright yellows. Why would I select these? Because if the visibility is only 3 inches, 6 inches, 12 inches, you have to get something that's really going to catch their eye. And then on body shape, you've also got to let their other senses take over. So they've got lateral lines and they can feel things in the water. And that's where I'd move up into your aggressive body rolls or very chunky bodies. You know, so a difference would be, for example, this would be clear water for me, both 3 inches. Yeah, this is the gunky whiz, this is the grubby shad. Yeah, so this is clear, a little bit of silver flake maybe, looks a bit roachy or a bit like a fry of some description. Little bit of paddle tail, but not huge amount of like full movement in the water. This guy, the grubby shad, absolutely amazing on the coloured canals, particularly for Zander. Look how big the body is, much chunkier body, much bigger tail. So these are both 3-inch lures. Have a look there. Almost twice the size is the paddle tail. Why? Because it's going to be pushing a load more water. I mean, one of the ways that I try and explain this is, have you ever broken down in your car at the side of the motorway and you get out your car, you're trying to call the AA or whatever, and every time there's a car going past, a small car, that's your whiz. You can feel it, you can hear it, but it's not too much, okay? Then a lorry goes past and you literally feel the air move because you're quite close to it and it's moving quite quick. I almost think of that, the same thing in coloured water. They can't see it as much, but they can feel, it's like a lorry going past, they can feel the water being pushed out of the way, and that allows them to be able to home in on a lure. If you're not giving any vibration, any colour, any reason for them to be able to spot it across any of their senses, you're going to really struggle in coloured water. Right, so now we're up to the final selection process of how to choose the correct soft plastic. We've already covered tail type, we've covered colour, we've covered water conditions, and we've also covered a little bit about body shape. And the final major factor really for me is what species you're targeting. So there's obviously quite a few different predator species in the UK, but notwithstanding the main three. So I'll talk about the main three, which for me is pike, perch, and zander. So starting with pike, very aggressive. They get themselves into a lot of trouble very quickly. Their instinct kicks in before they get the chance to think about it, particularly when pike are on the smaller side. When you get up to the real big ones, they're a little bit more clued up. But in general, I would say you want to fish pike fast and aggressive, and you can get away with fishing pretty large lures, even for fairly small ones. Their type of character is, I always think of them as the kid in the playground that always gets into trouble because he never thinks about it. He's always getting himself into a pickle. And yeah, that's just a classic pike for me. Bit too aggressive, bit too loud, gets himself in trouble. The other end of the scale, zander, I see zander as they're almost like that kind of, you know, they smoke a cigar and they're very sophisticated and they sit there and they think about things and they look at lures a little bit more, and there's ways that you can trick them into being more aggressive. But I think because we lure fish generally in the day, and zander, biologically, their eye is adapted very specifically for being able to feed at night, being able to feed in very, very low light conditions, in very muddy water. I see the zander more as, you have to look for a reaction strike for a zander. You have to sort of poke him and prod him and irritate him. We've got to get in his face to try and get him to bite a lure. I think during the daytime, they often sit very, very low in the water. That's why you're targeting them in the bottom 12 inches. And you want to be targeting them with bright coloured lures, biggish paddle tails, and you want to be hopping it along, and you really want to be irritating them. For pike, if the water's clear, I'll be selecting much more natural patterns, but you can get away with big lures. The gunky G-bump's my favourite. And you can fish them pretty fast, and I would continuously fish them. I wouldn't tend to stop, drop them down to the bottom a huge amount like I would with Zander. I'd fish a continuous wind, and I'd fish a lot more mid-water. Whereas your Zander, you'd be a lot more coloured, in their face, a lot slower, and you're just trying to poke them in the face. With your perch, for example, especially the smaller ones, you're really looking at that they're a shoal species. There's going to be a lot of them around. I tend to fish a lot of movement. They tend to react, especially during the warmer months, to a lot of aggression, a lot of twitching, tweaking it around, jerking it erratically. They're going to chase a lot. They're going to, because they're in a pack as well, I think they often think to themselves, if I don't get to that bit of what I think might be food first, someone else is going to. So they'll often sort of crawl over each other to get a bait. So perch in the smaller sizes are probably the easiest to catch. Select small lures though, because they tend to come up, grab the lure and then throw it quite quickly, and they'll peck at it a lot. Whereas a pike will come up and just try and engulf it a little bit more. So in terms of size, perch a little bit smaller, pike a bit bigger, Zander in the middle. In terms of speed, perch erratic, Zander a little bit slower near the bottom, pike a little bit quicker and further up in the water. So you're really just looking at selecting the correct type of lure that you can fish those methods. So yeah, just to finish off, in the gunky range, my favourites would have to be, if I was Zander fishing, vertical would probably be the gunky Vib or the gunky Wriggle. So either, basically they're the same. One's got a small paddle tail, one's got a V-tail if I'm vert jigging. If I'm casting for Zander, I tend to go for the 3-inch or possibly even the 4-inch gunky Tipsy XL. The big ribs on this allow it a lot of resistance, allow it to hold up in the water a lot better and get that real slow fall rate, which is what I'm looking for Zander. Nice and slow, big colours, get in their face quite a bit, and then for pike, the G-bump, out and out G-bump. There are other lures that I catch on, but the G-bump is my go-to. And for perch, smaller ones of, say, the Whiz, the 3-inch Tipsy XL, some of the smaller Tipsies as well, the Kiddie, which has got the little V-tail in it, or even the small, but anything small for perch I like. I think they're quite finicky on size. So that's pretty much it, guys. That rounds up my thoughts on how to select the correct soft plastics. I mean, you know as well as I do, the range, the choice that we've got out there is quite a minefield, and it's difficult to get your head around sometimes. So I hope you've learned something new today about how to select the right lures. If you've liked it, there'll be more videos coming, so subscribe below, and more than anything, I really want to create a dialogue. So leave your comments, leave your suggestions, and I'd love to get into some conversations with you guys about what your thoughts are as well. So thanks very much, over and out.